All right. So we have been working on like subsetting and filtering data, like data frames using like the bracket notation. We've been, talking about how to pull out rows and pull out columns based off of like their position, the indices, and the names. And then yesterday, I introduced you to ggplot, which is a package. And we're going to look at, I want to make another day3R script because I like having, oops. Day3.R. We're going to talk about another way to manipulate data frames using a new package called dplyr. dplyr. There we go. Get my learner notes open too. So, oh, hey, Juan, could you take out the red box, please? So the, where'd it go? Writing data frames, here we go. So, we say like manipulating data. We mean like adding, removing columns, making new variables, maybe aggregating the data, calculating summary statistics. So we can do these type of operations in base R itself, and we've seen that with well, can you pull over everything up until number 1? The select. I'll pull these here for a second. So we could do these operations using the base R functions that we've seen before. Take the Gapminder data set, specifically look at the GDP per capita, filter it for only African continent, and then take the mean. So say we wanted the average GDP per continent. We'd have to copy paste this one time for every continent. One, it's harder to read. You're repeating yourself a lot, easy to make typos, and could also introduce bugs. So we kind of want to have an alternative. Remember, there's usually a couple different ways to approach how to solve a problem. So the tidyverse is quoted as a opinionated family of R packages. And so ggplot is one of them. dplyr is another. tidyr is one. There's a good solid handful of packages where they're intentionally designed to work really, really nicely with each other. Most notably, the first argument in all of the functions is the data set. We saw this with ggplot. Now, we're going to talk about a way of combining commands together in a little bit, or chain them together, that only works when that first argument is the data set. So that's why if you're looking up how to do something in R, sometimes you may need to specify, I need a solution in base R, or I need a tidyverse way of doing it. And sometimes it's gotten a little bit better lately, but sometimes there's like two camps. There's like, oh, the old school people who were like, I'm going to do this all in base R. I don't want to do this tidyverse stuff. And then there's the people who are like, go tidyverse all the way. I'm kind of like in the middle. Whatever way works best. So again, it's going to be a stylistic thing. What works for you and your brain? So for the dplyr package, we're going to be looking at 5 verbs, basically. A verb is some action that we're going to do on the data set. So first and foremost, we need to load the library dplyr, dplyr. There's no package, right? Because I didn't install it yet. Packages, dplyr, dly. That was, I think, a challenge in one of like day 1 for you all that I just apparently didn't do on this computer. So cool. All right. Oh no, we installed plyr, not dplyr. Yeah, that should have been a dplyr. Well, plyr is, I think, a similar package to dplyr. I know there's subtly different functions between the two. And I think I might have just like not looked through the rest of the day 1 curriculum, and I assumed we were going to use packages out of plyr. But now that I've seen what other people like Jane covered, I don't think we've actually used it. So if I were to do this again, I would modify those instructions, that challenge, to install dplyr instead.
Oh, could you
Okay.
share the screen, actually?
Yes, thank you. Thank you. But how about am I sharing the correct screen? Yes, I am. Thank you, Ben. All right. So we've got our new R script. So the first verb we're going to look at is called select. And select, get here. Can you get the whole select section in, please? In the notes. Give it a second. I'll pull over the instructor notes again. So select chooses what columns to keep, right? So we saw this using like bracket notation and $ notation. So we're specifically pulling out columns. So the I gotta keep this over here. So select, chooses columns. So if we make a new data set where I want the year, the country, oh, you know what? I don't have Gapminder read in. You do, I do not. So let me get that copied over. Perfect. Okay. So if I want a data set that contains year, country, and GDP, I'm going to use the select function. And remember, the first argument is a data set. And then afterwards, you provide the list of variables that you want to keep separated with commas. So I want year, country, and GDP per cap. How about I run and load the library? There we go. I'm with it this morning. I'm catching up. Yep. So if I look at the head, the top 6 rows of this new data set, I see that there's only those 3 columns, year, country, GDP, right? The dimensions, and I can kind of confirm that, year, country. I still have all 1704 rows in that were in the original Gapminder data set, but I've only cut it down to 3.
Excuse me, do we need to install a dplyr because I get error that packet does not exist?
Correct. Yep. If you get that function not found command error like I did, you might have not loaded the library. But yes, we need to install the dplyr package if you've not done so yet.
So how to install? I forgot.
Install.packages.
And in the bracket, I provide the name of the package.
In quote, dplyr, like that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Put that right here as well. So that's choosing columns to keep. We can also drop columns using that similar negative continent. I'm going to put a head around this as well, so I only see the top 6 rows. So I'm selecting from the Gapminder data set everything except continent. So that negative index that we saw yesterday still holds here for selecting as well. Now this is where kind of the power of the tidyverse starts coming in, because often we don't want to do one thing at a time to a data set. Like select gap, from Gapminder, I want to get these variables out. Well, then maybe I want to filter rows, and then I want to aggregate data, and then I want to do like more things to the same data set. So we're going to use these things called a pipe. There's a lot of pipes in computer science. Here is one of them. This is the pipe that you'll find in the dplyr package. It's the %greater than% symbol to chain commands together. So this would look like, to get that year, country, GDP, to make the same. So we're going to rewrite the code on line 7 using pipes. Will look like this: Gapminder pipe select year, country, and GDP per capita. So the way we read these pipes is like an and then. I'm going to take the Gapminder data set and then select these variables. So what the pipe does is it takes everything on the left side of it and puts it into the first argument of whatever's on the right. And since in the tidyverse, the first argument is always the data set, we're passing this code, select Gapminder, and then all the variables is identical to Gapminder pipe select all the variables. So you're kind of thinking of it in terms of steps now, instead of like this nested function. And I'll be using pipes, frequently in this in today's lesson here. We can also rename on the fly, rename variables with select. For example, let me pull open the chat so I can see just in case. I could, so say I don't want GDP per cap listed like this. That variable name doesn't make sense to me like this. Using select, I want year, country. I want the variable name to be GDP underscore per capita instead. And I'm going to pipe head into this. So I'm taking the Gapminder data set and then selecting these variables. Oops. Selecting these variables. And as it's being read in, I'm changing the name of GDP per cap to GDP underscore per underscore capita. Because what somebody else named the variable name may not make sense in our head. And then I'm piping it into the head function. So you can see we're starting to like chain commands together. So we still have these 3 variables, and our GDP now has a different variable name. So that's selecting columns. The other thing we saw earlier was filter chooses rows. These are all boop, boop, boop. So let's maybe try to say, hey, look, I only want to examine or analyze countries on the European continent. I could take, so I want year, country, GDP, but for Europe only. I'm going to take the Gapminder data set and then Gapminder, thank you. It would have yelled at me. Yeah. And then I want to filter. Yes. Oh gosh, the short code for using the pipe is like Control Shift M. Ha ha! I remembered. They would be maybe Command Shift M. Control. Command. Shift M. There we go.
Yeah.
They both.
You're welcome.
There we go. So the pipe, this what we say was Control Shift M or Command Shift M as the short codes. Definitely make sure those are in the learner notes. Anyhow, let's go back to filtering. That's okay. Continent is Europe. I can spell Europe. So notice I'm writing a logical statement. I want to filter, so I want to select, pull out only the rows where this logical statement is true. So I want to filter my continent to Europe. And then I still want to select the year, country, and GDP per capita. Now, I hit Control Enter to run that command, and our studio knew that all 3 of these lines were connected to each other. My cursor only, when you have pipes, when you're chaining commands together, your cursor can be on any one of these lines. Our no's, they go together. You are absolutely welcome to highlight all of them and run all of them at the same time as well. But it's not minimally necessary. So let's look at year, country, GDP, euro. Well, it looks the same on the top because we've got Albania, but we only have 360 observations now instead of all 1704. Yep. So, as of this point, the result is a data frame, right? If I were to pipe head in, the last thing as of head, it's no longer a data frame. Well, it is a data frame, but it only has 6 rows. Exactly. So if I were to, the question was, could I still pipe head in here? Yes, you can. If we do that, we only have 6 observations because head only pulls the top 6.
Mine says this must be a invalid end. Must be,
When Jane gets back, she can look at your screen. It's okay. Up here on line 23, I didn't assign the results of this to anything. I just wanted to visually see it. Here, I'm assigning the results, and I want all of Europe, not just the top 6 rows. Hey, Jane, can you check in with Raquel real quick? Thanks. You can also apply multiple filters in the same filter statement. So let's copy that code and fix my typos. And let's change it so that we're getting the European countries in 2007. So to make another different data set, year, country, GDP, Euro 2007. And in the filter statement, I'm going to add a comma and say I also want rows where year is 2007. So you can put multiple logical conditions in that same filter statement. And so now I'm down to 30 observations. And equivalently, gosh, if I can spell, you can use the ampersand in the middle of this filter. By default, multiple criteria are treated as an and. Both criteria have to be met for those rows to be filtered out. So that means if you wanted all of Europe or all of 2007, you could change that to an or in that filter statement. Then it will correct. And absolutely also equivalently, if you wanted to do a second filter statement, this is functionally identical. Because sometimes, and I've done this, I'm taking a data set, I'm going to filter down to certain rows, I'm going to do a few things to it, and now I want to filter again because I made some new variables and I want to filter on the new variables that weren't there at the beginning. So absolutely. But yes, it's still going to be treated as an and. Because we're taking Gapminder and then filtering on Europe continent, and then filtering on the year 2007, and then selecting these variables. So, and the order matters. Okay, challenge time. So, perfect. Thank you. Write a single command, and that could be multiple lines and pipes, that starts with the Gapminder data set and produces a data frame that has African values, or for life expectancy, country, and year only for Africa. Go ahead and pull in the other challenge as well. And kind of a second part of this is play around with what happens if you switch the order of the select and the filter statement and try to figure out why what happened. And green check marks and stickies when you're done. No? Oh, it will look a lot like this. We're starting with our Gapminder data set, then doing a filter, then doing a select. So if you're having trouble getting started, copy the code that we started with, copy this last example, and then modify it to meet the challenge. Modify it to only pull out Africa. Make sure we're pulling the requested variables. Why? Think about how to read the pipes. All right, I'm not seeing a lot of green checks in the Zoom chat. So if you've got some questions, then please speak up or put them in chat. So we're going to start getting more fancy here in a minute. No, the challenge doesn't say anything about 2007. Yep. Awesome. All right. So our challenge, actually we'll just throw the solution in to perfect. Thank you. Right. So we're starting.
It seems like the Gapminder data does not have Africa country.
Because it's a continent. Yep.
Oh,
Not a
okay. Okay, sorry. So I need
That's
to go.
okay.
Okay, got it.
But like, that's, you know, a great example of a common error in just mixing up our variable names.
Yeah, so I need to put the continent so I can see the data accordingly.
Yep. So we're just going to filter the continent instead of trying to filter a country of Africa. You're going to filter the continent.
No, that I did filter on continent Africa, but by selecting the data, I did not put continent, so I could not see continent there.
Well, that is exactly what the second challenge is about. If we used, so let's look at this. Or that's the second challenge is asking. So here we're taking the Gapminder data set, which at this point has all the columns in it. Now I can filter to only pull out the rows where the continent equals Africa. It still has all columns in it, but only rows with Africa. So this is got all columns, but only rows, only requested rows. Now I am pulling out extract only three columns. If I reversed those, we would start with the Gapminder data set. Select these variables. I'm just going to pop head in there so we can see. How about year, country, lifespan? We'll get this error if we try to now filter on continent, because object continent not found. Order of operations. Gapminder, and then we've selected these three variables. Continent is not a variable on the data set as of line 58, so it cannot filter. No, it reads top down. Do this, and then this, and then this, and then this. You may be thinking about how functions are nested. They have to be read from the inside out. Okay. So that's two verbs, select and filter. Let's look at another verb, group by. Now this one by itself is going to seem kind of boring or just not helpful, right? So like let's look at the structure of Gapminder first. So Gapminder says it's a data frame. It's got 1,700 observations, 6 variables. Now let's look at the same structure of Gapminder after we group by continent. You know what? I'm going to keep instead of nesting structure, I'm going to pipe it in the way I've been piping in head. They are absolutely equivalent. So after I group it by the variable continent, it now has like this flag on the data set. It's still 1,700 rows and 6 columns, but now it's this grouped data frame. I'm still going to call this a group data frame, even though there's no U here. So it doesn't look like it actually did anything. On the back end, what's going on is this little flag says, okay, everything you're going to do to the data set now, we're going to do separately for each of those groups. So in this picture, we've got it's functionally acting like we have 3 different data sets where group 1 is where A is 1, group 2 is A is 2, group 3 is A is 3. So functionally right now, after you group the Gapminder by continent, it's acting as if we have 1 data set per continent. Okay, great. Why? Because summarize. Summarize creates aggregate values. You're wanting to like calculate a mean life expectancy per continent. So summarize will aggregate and make a new variable. And it's used in combination with functions like the mean or the standard deviation, or like count or something. And after grouping by. So let's take the Gapminder data set again. And I want to create a data set called GDP by continent. Although that does, we'll call it the mean GDP by continent, because that's a pretty useful or descriptive data set name. So we're going to take the Gapminder data set, group it by continent, and then summarize. I'm going to make a new variable called mean GDP per cap, and that variable is going to be calculated as taking the mean of the variable GDP per cap. So in that summarized statement, we're making a new variable called mean GDP per capita, and we're creating that new variable using the mean function.
You have an S somewhere.
Do I have an S in summarized? Yes. And this is the New Zealand
Yeah,
way of, it's Z or yes. So I didn't get an error with Z, and I don't get an error with S. And now let's look at that resulting data set. It only has 5 observations and 2 columns. So summarize, grouping by summarize is going to cut down. You're making now an aggregated data set. 1 row for each one of those grouped data, each one of those groups. And then you're only keeping the columns of the group and whatever variable you created. Here was mean GDP per capita. Visually, this is called a split, apply, combine process. We take the data set, split it by whatever groups, apply that function that you're asking for to each of those groups, and then put them back together. And like this is, I mean, how many times do we ask for the average GPA per major, or the average time it takes someone to graduate a program based off of what college they're in, or something like that? Exactly, the average soil organic matter material per field, year, and depth, right? And treatment. So this is super powerful. And so group by and summarize always kind of go together. And of course it will get better. We're going to keep building on this, but for now, challenge. We just calculated the average GDP per continent. I want you now to calculate, copy, paste, and modify, but calculate the average life expectancy per country. And then number 2 in this challenge is to see if you, it's kind of an advanced challenge, see if you can pipe in a filter afterwards to figure out which country has the longest life expectancy and which one has the shortest. A tibble is a, it's not a fancy data frame, a fancy table. It is, at this level, for all intents and purposes, it's a data frame. It's a data frame with other like flags attached to it that the tidyverse functions like using to get into more of the specifics of the difference between a tibble and a data frame. I would direct you to the Googles because it gets into like some nuances. So I want to see green check marks after you complete number 1. Oh, yeah. Got green stickies. Love it. All right, I'm seeing some green check marks popping up. So let's see about this. Challenge 2. I'm going to take the code that I just used and modify it. I want to have now I think it's a country level average life expectancy is what we're going for. So I'm going to group by country. And I want the mean life expectancy calculated as the mean life expectancy. So definitely some pretty big differences here in life expectancy across these different countries. There's two more functions. There's one more verb, and then one more fancy thing that I want to show before going on to a break. And so what we're going to do is we're going to put the so there's a solution for the second challenge using a filter to pull out the mean or the minimum and the maximum life expectancy. So we could pipe in this filter statement. To get Iceland and Sierra Leone. Min max. Okay, so we can group on multiple variables though. Right? So let's say I don't want the overall Gapminder group by country, no, continent and year. So I want the yearly average within continent. And so this will first group on continent and then within continent group on year. Now if I take my mean GDP, I get one row per combination of continent and year. Okay. But we can also create multiple summaries. Told you, it just keeps getting, you know, we can keep adding to it. dplyr is pretty dang powerful. So copy pasting. I don't just want the mean GDP per capita. I also want the mean, the average population, average population per year, and the standard deviation, because variance is important. Says my statistics hat. Nope, GDP per cap and the standard deviation of the population. So in that single summarized statement, I can calculate multiple summary statistics. They're all going to be on that same per continent per year basis. So the last verb that we're going to cover is mutate. And this creates a new variable, a new non-aggregated variable. So like GDP per capita, I want to convert that to like a different set of units. So say I want actually the GDP per billion people so that everyone's on the same scale. So I could take my Gapminder data set and I want to mutate, make a new variable called GDP per billion. And I'm going to calculate that new variable specifically by taking GDP per capita, multiplying it by the population size. And this is going to happen on each row. So for every row, we're taking we're making a new variable called GDP billion. And it's going to take the value of GDP per capita, multiply it by the value of the population for that same row, and then divide by 10 to the 9th power, which is a billion. So here's our per billion. And just to show you what that looks like, scroll up to the top. I now have all of my original columns, plus I've added a new column that does this math across these two variables. Now I'm going to go and get all of the same group by summarized code that I did before. So I still want my yearly, by year by continent averages. But I also want my mean and standard deviation of this new variable. Mean, standard deviation, I'm going to call it mean GDP billion, and the standard deviation GDP billion. So taking the Gapminder data, making a new variable, then grouping by, then summarizing. And so I can access that variable that I created in the second pipe in the same workflow, basically. So now I have the mean and standard deviation of the population, of the GDP per capita, and of the GDP per billion people. There's going to be a couple more examples put into the learner notes that also kind of show like how you can create these new variables like conditionally, like calculating life expectancy only for those above 40 years old. Or if it's the GDP scaled, like calculate the GDP only for people or only for countries with life expectancy over 25, things like that. I want to get into, I want to close with combining dplyr and ggplot. So I started this lesson with saying how these packages are part of the tidyverse and they're intentionally wanting to work, they're intentionally structured so they work together. So I want to demonstrate that. So we can really leverage the kind of the commonalities of these packages. So I'm going to type it, but again, this is a lot of sort of commands. So please go to the learner notes and copy. Actually, I'm just going to go to learner notes and copy it over too. All the way down. So I want you guys to copy it all the way down. And I'm going to do part of it. So this is what I was talking about. We're taking the Gapminder data set. I'm making a new variable called the future expectation of GDP. Grouping it by continent and year, doing some summarizing. So I got the mean and the mean of GDP per cap and the expected. Right, so this is it has a structure of a data set that we saw before, by continent, by year. Now we can directly pipe that into ggplot. Because ggplot has the first argument being the data set, everything above, everything highlighted, everything above the ggplot is all a data frame. And so that whole thing, that data frame that we're looking at here now gets passed into ggplot. So I don't need a data argument. I can go straight into the mapping. And I can load library, the ggplot2 package, so that I can plot. Could not find function is error like number 17 of things we do daily because we forget to load the library. And so now I have, without saving an intermediate data set, and all kind of in one workflow, I've gone from the full Gapminder data set to a nice plot that shows a trend in expected GDP per capita over time for the different continents. Yay. So I'm going to end with one last challenge, and then we'll roll into a break till 10:45. So create a plot for the life expectancy over time for the Americas. And so we looked at life expectancy over time when we talked about ggplot yesterday. So don't feel that you have to remember everything. I mean, you just learned it yesterday. Go back to your notes, copy that code over, and then use the dplyr functions we just learned to only plot Americas. And so this little drop-down hint kind of provides like step-by-step, hey Jane, step-by-step, like do this, then do this, then do this, without giving you the code. Just kind of gives you a hint on like the process. Because quite often what you're going to be asked to do or presented is like, I want to see this end result. I want to see the life expectancy over time for all the countries in the Americas only. How do I get there? Starting with this Gapminder data set. Starting with what the data structure I have, how do I get to the plot that I want? So if you're struggling on figuring out how to get from where you're at to the picture, go ahead and drop down that hint and see kind of the suggested steps to take. All right, I'm going to clear off. So take down your green stickies unless you're done. I'm going to clear back the feedback. Now we can see you can put up your green stickies and green checks when you're done. So panel, AKA facet for country. Ryan, so is this the first time that you've had issues with the pipe? Because we've been using the pipe for most of the.
Let's put that window.
Code looks fine. Um do it like line by line. Start with gapminder, make sure it works. Then do gapminder and then copy the mutate statement. So gapminder pipe mutate, see if that works. Here, let's yeah, so yeah, the pipe is, Ben's right, the pipe is in the dplyr library, but we've been working with the pipe for the last hour or so, and if he's now getting the error on the pipe and it was working before, that's what I'm confused on. And so when you take a bunch of code from someone else and try to modify it for your own, which is kind of what we all do, really simplify it and make sure each line works one at a time, then add on like line by line. Oh, yes. If it made you restart when you installed ggplot, you had to load the dplyr library. You don't have to install it. You absolutely can use one or more than one package at a time. And that is quite common, is to like, I need the read Excel package to read in data from an Excel file, and then I need ggplot because I'm going to plot, but I need dplyr because I'm do some data manipulation. Absolutely. What might have happened is you installed it and R didn't like you having a package loaded when you tried to install another package that, not say conflicted, but they kind of talk to each other. So you install it once, but every time you start RStudio, you have to load the libraries that you're going to use in that code file. That exactly explains. Yeah, sure. If you're done with this, you're on break. Yeah, we'll be back at 10:45. Recommend for keeping track of which functions are in which package. I wish I had a nice way just.
Hi, this is Mary from Tax Group Center. I hope all is well.
Part of it is the more you use it, the more you'll remember, which is not really like very helpful helpful advice. And so if you're like, you know, forget what group by is in, you know how you can use the question, one, you can always Google what packages group by in using R. Two, there's the question mark help for like to pull up the help file. Now, and it shows you right here that group by is in the dplyr library. However, if you don't have that library loaded, you need to use 2 question marks. So say summarize. 2 question marks will search all of the possible help pages and show you what package, like there's a summarize in dplyr, there's a summarize in plyr. So it's like, here's all of the packages that say the word summarize in it somewhere. And so I'll use this sometimes to be like, oh, yep, there it is. Because like, I know I'm not working with plyr, I'm working with dplyr. That's kind of my tactic. If any of the other instructors have other tactics for remembering what functions are in what packages, please share. But I usually use Google or the double question mark. Oh, no. You only need to, Ryan, you only install the packages once per time you installed R or updated R, but you load the libraries anytime you restart R and want to use a function from that package. So sometimes, so like in day 3, we're using dplyr and ggplot. In day 1, we weren't. So in day 3 script, I've got the dplyr library, but in day 1, I don't. No, you don't, you only install packages once. Yes, perfect, Maribel. Exactly. Got it? You got a little time.
Took me a long time to get there.
We yesterday did this part. We just did the ggplot part.
But we were able to pull out like certain countries. Oh, but we subset the data.
Exactly. We did it manually. We made a new data set using. So here it's like, I don't want to keep that intermediate data set that only has the Americas. I just want to plot it. And so that is super memory efficient, especially if you're working with like, you know, gigs of data. You don't have the space to make copies of all of these subsets. And then it just becomes repetition. I mean, can you imagine like having all of this ggplot code 5 times, one for every country? Yes, you can create functions that call ggplots. Absolutely. Yep. There's some. Exactly. Now there's things with dplyr and ggplot when you are accessing them inside of functions. You have to get at the variable names a little differently. There's like a little subtle tweak that we're not getting into here. But I absolutely can. We can talk about that later. But absolutely, you write your own custom function, say I want to do this aggregation or I want to be able to make this type of plot, but I want to control my year and my X or my Y, my life expectancy. I want to see this with GDP, but I don't want to run this, copy all of this code. And I want to pass this variable, pass that variable, pass, yes, 100%. Uh-huh. Mhm. But that's how we learn, is we find something we like, and then we copy it a whole bunch, and then we start feeling comfortable with the code that made it. Now it's like, okay, now I want to learn how to do all of this more streamlined. That's when it's like, okay, I'm ready to learn. Yep. Now I'm ready to learn how to take this code and turn it into a function. Yes, exactly, how to abstract it into something different. Exactly. Put the tweak in the learner notes. Which one? What? Happy to add to the notes, Jan, if you can be a little bit more specific. You can also,
Can I
edit-
just tell you verbally, Robin? I'm sorry.
totally fine. What's up?
I'm disabled and typing is difficult.
No problem.
The tweak that you said about getting at the names of the plotting like the years and the axes names, you said there was a shorter way to do it, a neater way, I thought, so that we can skip the multiples of code and just get from one to the other.
Getting the name.
Maybe I didn't hear you correctly. But you said there was a subtle tweak for something. And they
For passing. Yeah, let me see. I have to look it up often. It was about passing, writing a function that contains dplyr or ggplot code in it.
yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Okay, so there it is. Okay. Can I put ggplot and or dplyr code inside a function, custom function? Yes, with some slight modification, tweak to how variables are called. And I have to Google this every time. Calling variables inside functions. Nope. Passing variables into dplyr to custom functions. That's 2018. Tidy select. No. Yep. 2020. So Raquel, we've been doing this with your functions. And so I know like this was one of the ways but wasn't it like we could like double put, yes, these things. No, wait, argument type, data masking. Yeah. If you want to supply the variable, we have to use supply the okay, so I'm gonna, yep. Where is,
I'm not seeing very well.
Okay, all right, thank you. Because I was like, I don't know where it's going. It's not going anywhere.
okay. So it's like, oh, nope, not that one. The way that this, to do this has changed over the last 5 or so years. And so like how I learned it to begin with was those end quote, double exclamation point, obnoxious, figuring things out. But now I believe that they've fixed not fixed, they've modified dplyr. Where are my notes? Oh, they're right here. To variables are referenced using two braces. I think this might just be dplyr code. Data masking.
A double exclamation point before.
There's that end quoting is one way to do it. Yeah, that's an old. Yes. That's kind of what I was saying, is like the solution to how to avoid the masking has kind of evolved in the last 5 years ago or so. Anything regarding the tidyverse, you want to look up no more than like 5 years ago. And so in the notes, in the learner notes, I put a reference to the data masking and the tidy evaluation. And so you use these two braces around.
Oh, wait, oh, it already said it. Oh.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.